My name is Shoshana Kessock. I'm a graduate student at the NYU Game Center. I'm also a LARP designer for the last 5 or 6 years. Oh, there we go. Hi. I've worked on over 25 different LARPs over the last, like I said, 5 or 6 years. I also work in tabletop RPGs, and I've branched out now into digital games. So what we're going to talk about today is LARP is Indie, is the title of this, and it's live action game design. But specifically what I want to talk about is actually the crossovers between live action role-play games and the design that we do and what people do when they design indie video games. So we're going to start off a little bit by talking about LARPs themselves, because I'm not sure how much everybody in the audience is actually familiar with LARP. So if you've heard this before, it's just a refresher. So LARP stands for live action role-play games, and what that is it's a style of games in which players physically act out their characters' actions. So you get up from the table, you walk around, you dress up in costumes, you go out and you set scenes in the physical world. What that actually does is games can range from like the highly immersive, what you see is what you get environments with 360-degree immersion or as close to it as you can get, to very abstract games that are done in black box theaters with very little setup, very little costumes. The actual aim of it, though, is that you as a player are getting up and enacting your character's actions. It's the basic shorthand of LARP. So, brief history, I'm not going to go into the entirety of it, but LARP's roots can be traced back to the 1970s and the arrival of tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, but its traditions go back a heck of a lot further than that. It's influenced by a lot of things like murder mystery weekends, haunted house attractions, historical reenactments, and non-traditional theater schools like Brechtian theater, stuff like that. It hit a major boom in the 1990s, actually, with introduction of games like White Wolf's games like Vampire the Masquerade, which was a huge movement that took over the world for a little while of LARP. And after that, it hit a lull for a little while in the late 90s, but then picked up again and has been consistently growing ever since. It's branched out to become actually an international gaming form with different traditions that have developed in different parts of the world. LARP is very different here than in other countries, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. But it's also expanded from like your basic traditional fantasy, Tolkien-esque, medieval games to many different settings like steampunk, post-apocalyptic, and even very realistic, gritty personal dramas. So, where can you LARP? Pretty much any of those countries. And there's more LARPs being found every year. There's hundreds of thousands of LARPers around the world, and we simply don't know how many, actually, because LARPers are not very good at communicating with one another about where we are. We seem to develop in these little pockets, and then nobody tells each other where they're at. So we're actually working on a LARP census right now that's online, where we're trying to find all the communities and network them together.
Lightning bolt!
Anybody seen this before?
Lightning bolt!
This is the traditionally known video of what LARP looks like for most people. It is not an accurate depiction of the LARP experience. And we're going to talk about why right now. So, what you're seeing here, that's pretty much everybody's response when you see that video. Funny thing, I've met that guy and I know those people, and they're up in a game up in New Hampshire and they're still playing after all these years. So why is that video so famous? It got on YouTube, everybody's seen it, and this is the appearance that people have seen of LARP. The problem is that it's really erroneous, because the problem is we are looking at it from the outside. And a lot of LARP designers, especially and thinkers, like Jaakko Stenros and Marcus Montala specifically, they wrote a book called Pervasive Games. They've been thinking a lot about how LARP is perceived and what it looks like to other people. And they believe, and I believe this too, that LARP is not meant for an outside audience. It's not really designed for it. To actually experience it, the audience of LARP is first person. So the only experience that you can really get to see what it looks like is inside. LARP is effectively a real world first person shooter. And you're gonna get a chance to see what that looks like right now.
8, 6, 7.
So this is actually a friend of mine, Josh. He shoulder mounted a cam for himself during game. Music is purely dramatic. We don't actually play with that music.
Chop 1, chop 2, chop 3, chop.
What you're hearing him say is actually skill calls. Those are effectively things that his character can do, the same way that a video game character would be able to enact a skill in a game.
They got Sully.
Looks a little like Doom, actually, when you think about it.
Ow! Fear.
Another skill call. Got to rescue the guy who's dying on the ground, obviously. Just the same kind of rescue mission you have in a video
8
game.
damage. Fair. 8. 8 damage. 8 damage.
4, 5.
Nice shoot. Nice shoot.
5.
Brick weapon.
Another skill. I'm going to skip on because it's pretty much the same thing. But effectively, you get the idea. So that is the first-person view. That is what you are actually designing for when you design a LARP. You're not designing for anybody who's on the outside or for a third-person view. You have to give the player that first-person experience. So the fact of the matter is, so what does that tell you about designing LARPs? Is that you have to take yourself out of the headspace initially of designing the world. You have to oftentimes design specifically for how your players are going to interact with the world. So that's my little introduction to how LARP design works. But now let's talk a little bit about what the overlap is into video game and indie design. So effectively, LARP has a lot in common with indie video game design in that, like, we are driven by designing a vision of the individual. Most LARPs are usually run by 1 or 2 people, or the biggest teams are usually maybe 10 or 15. They're usually done pretty much out of pocket without any corporate backing or financial sponsorship. It's all done for the love of the game in a lot of cases, and most of the time, people who are designing it are unpaid. It's motivated by the community that's around them and creating a good experience for the players and innovating the future of LARP, basically, and trying to get better games done. So if that doesn't sound like a lot of people who are sitting and slaving away at the code mines, I don't know what does. So what do we have in common? And that's what I wanted to talk about, is how we can learn from one another so that we can actually start growing sort of a language between indie video game design and LARP. What can we learn from each other, and how can we help each other? So the 4 places that I've actually identified is effective UI design is a problem for everybody. And the semiotics of designing effective UIs is still the same, whether or not you're doing it in a video game or whether or not you're doing it in real life. The other is, just conveying information through your space, which includes NPCs, environmental design, props, all that stuff. Reliance on independent innovation, where you don't have, the backing of giant corporations and having to do it all by yourself. And then community support and what it looks like, and that's a community like this, or in the LARP community, as I'm going to show you. So there's a really long quote up there, and it basically is on a paper about semiotics in video games. And the short end of it is basically talking about the different elements that go into your design. Every part of what you put into your game creates the world inside the mind of the player, whether that's going to be the text that you put in, the colors that you put in, the audio, everything creates the environment. In games like Super Hexagon, the color and sound indicating state changes is enough to show that something is happening. These kind of things in a semiotic choice is very important for players to understand what's going on. And the aesthetic consistency of conveying information, such as knowing when the bad guys are going to blow up or not, is very important. So the little green guys have always got to be the little green guys, or else people are going to get really confused. All of these things are consistent across both kinds of games. So we're going to use an example which I'm really familiar with. Are these actually on? No, okay. I'm actually going to use an example that I'm familiar with because I used to work for these guys until recently. It's a game called Dystopia Rising, and it's a zombie apocalypse game where you are a survivor in the post-apocalypse trying to rebuild the world where the undead are pretty much all over the place and they're going to eat you. So you have to help rebuild society. This game is really important for information to be exceptionally clear. Why? Because just like in a video game, if you don't know what's coming to kill you, you're going to get dead very quickly. But in a LARP, there is no reset button. There is no, we're going to pause the game and go get a snack. I mean, sometimes you can, but not really. And in a game like this, there is no, you might have a couple of extra lives, but Not really. There's real-time consequences to not understanding the system as it is. So when it is designed, it needs to be exceptionally clear what is going on, and especially from afar. As you saw in that video, things happen pretty quickly. And if you don't understand something like what's coming to attack you, you're pretty much dead. So any aesthetic choices that you put into the game matter. Everything from, for example, this is a zombie, and she's carrying beaters, which are supposed to represent your fists, because you can't actually punch people in LARP no matter what the movies say. You have these small clubs, they represent fists, they do a certain number of damage. This is known. That is a shorthand understood by players and staff alike. By correctly identifying that and putting that out in the world, staff is indicating exactly what you have to worry about. If you see something else that doesn't look like that, well, then you have to start to worry. That on the right is a regular shambler. It's not going to kill you that badly. But if you notice on the left, there's something with a mask on, and that's pretty dangerous. That's called a hate, and generally it will wreck your day. So if you can't tell the difference of that immediately, you as a player will have a very bad day. And if there is no consistency, if a shambler came out looking like that, we'd be really worried. But at the same time, if it came out without the mask and then started wailing on you, a player might walk up to the staff and say, "I'm confused. Isn't that not how the system runs?" So the shorthand at a distance is really important. That photo is of a great number of people coming to kill the players. And if you don't understand what they can do simply by the visual aesthetics, you can't survive. The visual aesthetics of these guys, which are called the Aesir, are that they're not zombies, they're very smart, they work together, and they will kill you faster than any zombie ever. And they all run in packs like this. You can understand that if you're standing, a mile away and you see this coming, you'll know what to prepare for. Remind you of anything? When you're playing a digital game, it's the exact same thing. Any digital design that doesn't earmark exactly aesthetically how the monsters work is going to create frustrated players. It's simple enough. If the monster that was coming after you 1 minute was running and then just decided to explode, if it keeps switching off, you're going to get really confused. So that's one part of how we have similarities. But the other is in NPC designs. Now, NPCs, when you're putting out information into a game, can be extremely difficult. Clara and Matthew were just talking about putting information forward in games and how branching narratives is difficult. Anytime that you're designing a narrative that's going to have a lot of information being passed by an NPC, a non-player character, you're going to have to worry about how much you can code in, how much you can actually provide to the players before you just get a glut of code. The NPCs, thankfully, in LARP, we have the luck of actually having actors being able to play these. But if you think that the restriction is not the same, you're actually a little wrong, because the worst thing that can ever happen in a LARP is an NPC doing something it's not supposed to. It's sort of like imagining if one of your characters in your game decides it wants to go have lunch instead of rescuing the princess. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, and our code doesn't crash. It just keeps going and runs away from you. And then you have to fix it on the fly. The running joke is that no plot of a LARP ever survives encountering with the players, because something will always happen. But NPCs have to be designed extremely clearly, with clear instructions as to what they do and what they don't do. You have to make sure what they say, where they go, and what they don't do and where they don't go, because anything else outside will skew the game experience in directions that you're not looking to do and change your frame of the entire game. And this is the really important one. This is where we really get into the bread and butter of what LARP does really well, and that's environmental design. LARP is all about creating the experience around you because it's about the physical world. If you didn't want to interact with the physical world, you could go sit at a table and role play. But the idea is that you wanted to put together a costume and go out in the world and improv. Well, here it is. The complexity of the design and the aesthetic does not always mean effectiveness. I've seen games that have tried to be extremely complicated and propped and looks like something out of Lord of the Rings, and it's absolutely awful. Why? Because it's overly complex. There are plenty of video games that we've seen that have actually hit that same problem, where they go into amazing world building and then forget that there are some basics about storytelling that don't really quite make it in the door. But LARP designers have learned to make do with very little and be clear about what they need to put forward to make the story good, to make the interaction good. I love the quote that you guys put up, that Clara and Matthew put up, which is, Game is really not about plot. It's about the interaction of setting and character to create drama. And that's exactly what happens here. The characters that the players bring to the table interact with the things that LARPers can put out there, the LARP designers put out there, and create the drama that's going to happen. So you can have anything from a game that has huge budgets to things that use PVC pipe and a trip to Home Depot. And you can create this one on the bottom here. This is a game called Call of Cthulhu, or Cthulhu Live as it's played in, as a LARP. The one up above is on a spaceship where they're trying to figure out how to not crash into the sun. And the one down here, they're on an 1800s train. That is garbage bags from Home Depot with PVC piping. And they're in chairs. And the people are trapped inside of a train that's going to derail. They do that for 2 hours, and they're comfortable and happy with it. They don't need giant, sets in Unity. It's cool. We're fine. Children's toys are also awesome. We repurpose them all the time. Toys R Us is our friend. But the clarity of design is the most important part. Making sure that what you put into the world represents exactly what you want the players to understand about the world. In this train car, they turned off the lights 2 minutes later. It was dark and confined, and that's all they needed to know. And this is another example of, I keep moving back. This is another example of actually procedural generation, but using children's toys. It's a thing called Starship Valkyrie, and it's effectively FTL, except with people at different tables. It is procedurally generated. Everything happens by pulling cards off of the top of a deck and handing the problems to the different crew members so that they can put out fires and face alien threats. But all of this is done by interacting with what is procedurally generated on the fly by the staff members and what is responded to by the players. The great part about it is that it can actually teach you a great deal, and if you ever wanted a really good way of paper prototyping your game, this is a really good way to start. So these right here are actually I'm envious of these people, so all the time. This is in Russia. They play Fallout in actual bunkers. I know, I want to go there. But basically the game format is reliant upon what the players can learn from their surroundings. I know that probably people have seen LARP movies where the storyteller is standing there feeding lines to people. That's not really how it works. Everything is about the environmental storytelling. Everything is about every single object that you interact with and what the world looks like around you, setting the scene and giving you the experience of being in a fallout shelter, being in a Russian gulag, whatever it is. But it's also a design choice exactly how much you put in and how much you don't. The same way that Clara was talking about before about closed spaces, you can choose to run a LARP that's held in a closet. I've seen it. It's kind of funny. But it's a LARP about one person trying to get out of a closet. That's all it is. But there's also LARPs about people, sitting around a dinner table having dinner and talking about divorce or being stuck in a Russian gulag. It's all about how you design environmentally. So typically the Russian gulag is not going to look like your dinner table, and hopefully, and vice versa. The idea is that, like anything else, it's an actual choice of what you put in. This is a typical example, actually, of how you can set one space to be the exact same thing, the exact separate thing, but it's the same space. That room is the same room. It's a giant room inside a very dingy building that we like to play in. But on the left, it's set up to be a distillery and sort of a flop house in the post-apocalypse. That's actually a still made out of a bunch of cans and a bunch of cloth and setup, and people sleep behind there. In here, it's a medieval forge, and where they have feasts, and where the crown prince sits. So it's the same room, but it's all decorated by different choices of the colors used, the textures, the sights, the smells, the food. Everything is important, and this is where I think the lesson comes in from LARP design so heavily, is that when you're designing a digital game, I certainly don't expect smells, but when I see a digital game that creates worlds by using the textures that you can input into the game, by using color effectively, just to show the difference in a state. If you use anything, the props to the design, that's how you create worlds. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's a choice how much you include and how much you don't. These are games that use less and rely on the less is more option. The games that I showed you before are considered the live combat high immersive games. These are games that are held more in theater style, where they're usually in conference rooms, hallways, but they use elements. So for example, on the left-hand side is a game that I ran called Tales of the Rising Star, which is Battlestar Galactica set game. we created an engine that pulsed and moved and had all kinds of stuff, but people were just dressed in costume because we couldn't actually change hallways. It wasn't going to be able to, we don't have that kind of budget. On the right-hand side, however, is a Dresden Files game, which people can come in their own outfits. I also run that game. And people come in their own outfits and play for a few hours as characters from the Dresden Files. There is no set, but people take the information given and create it in their minds with specific small things. We created a small coffee shop in the back. That was it. That's all they needed. And then if you really want to stretch down, you've got black box games and very abstract games. These specifically are some really cool exercises done out of the LARP school. This was in Norway last year. And this was a game called Stereo Hearts, where the entire mechanics of the game were done by music on a stereo. You could only speak to each other and convey emotion with music on a stereo, but you couldn't touch each other or go near each other. There was no set, there were no costumes. It was completely through acting and improv. Over here was a game called Service that I ran after I designed it for the NYU Game Center. And it was black box technique all the way. There were no props, and it was about experiencing what it's like to be drafted for World War III. And we played it in one room. It takes an hour, and you get to experience what it's like to sacrifice or not to sacrifice your life for your country. You don't need a props. You don't need a set. All you need is your experience of what it's like to hear the word sacrifice or patriotism. That's all you need. So how do you see this in indie games? Well, the typical example that I came across immediately was Gone Home. Gone Home uses all of that environmental design very carefully, and in Gone Home, it's a choice exactly how much is designed and where it's put. The same way that a player is going to walk up and find a book that's wrecked in his giant, what I'm assuming is very heavy armor, and find it and read some sort of special mystery that he's going to then convey to the players. You find things throughout the entire world of Gone Home to tell you the story of what's going on in that game. And it's pretty much the exact same idea, but if you really wanted to experience what it's like to find those objects, try doing it in a house. Try doing it with your own hands. And then, when you can move it over into a digital space, you'll understand a little bit better what your players will experience through the medium of your game. So, yeah, it is just like indie design, and also the fact that there's usually a much smaller budget than we would like. On the left-hand side is the very popular Monitor Celestra that everybody knows about, which is the Battlestar Galactica game that was run in Sweden last year, and it had a budget of upwards of $154,000. They were a pay-for-play model game, which was played on a Soviet battleship. And everybody had costumes, and they stayed for 3 days, and it was an incredible experience for everybody that was there. They had that budget, and they could do it. That is the game that I use that as the example. That's GTA right there. That is the GTA of LARP. We're still all trying to catch up. I will also point out, by the way, in Europe, they get funding because LARP is considered an art form there. So governments fund LARPs. That doesn't happen here. Our budget was $500, split among 4 people, and a great deal of Staples rewards cards. That's pretty much how we design LARPs, with nothing. So some budgets are bigger than others. The lesson is that you create with what you've got. You make do with what you have to create the best innovations that you can. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed a little bit. Ooh, I went past the important one. Uh-oh. Dink. Please go back. Really? It's taking a second. There we go. It slowed. The last important one, though, is that LARP is a really great place for personal games. They were talking about dysphoria a few minutes ago. I also use Depression Quest as a good example. But LARP, because of its ability to reach people personally and on a social level, one-to-one in a physical space, allows people to experience these personal stories in a very intense way, and usually for the price of what it takes to go to Kinko's, as opposed to large productions. The other reason it's important is that there is no medium between. It allows people to empathetically understand one another in a way that is extremely unmediated and intense. Let's see. The feedback is immediate. Your players will tell you if you mess up. You don't have to wait for play-by-play reports. You don't need many play testers. Why? They will absolutely tell you to your face immediately if a mechanic doesn't work, and it will allow you to innovate faster and to be more honest and transparent about your design. But more than that, it creates natural community. And this is something that I find is really important about being a game designer. I feel like, especially today when you can be very isolated as an independent creator, Having the community to support you is incredibly important. All those people with the arrows are designers, but also players. So they have the resources of all the people around them to go in and say, this is what I need to design my games. This is an important part, I think, that we could draw upon more in the digital world, to be there for one another and to help one another grow as designers. Only by recognizing the similarities of our innovation, the similarities of our game design, is innovation going to flourish. So thank you very much, and any questions? Any at all? Sure.
Do you have a resource where people, we have like a group of people who like to play games,
Yeah.
but we don't have someone who designs the games necessarily? Is there a resource where we can like download a game?
Sure, it depends. Yeah, sure, it depends on what kind of game you're looking for. There are a couple of websites that are trying to gather this stuff. Like I said, LARPs can be very disparate and spread out. There is for the Nordic games and the freeform games that are out there. There is NordicLARP.org is a place to go. Another great website is Lizzie Stark's blog. She's a game designer and a journalist, and she does a lot of gathering of stuff. It's LizzieStark.com, I think. And LARPing.org is the one for the United States, but it's not really updated. Like I said, that's the one problem that we have is our communities are very strong, but independent of one another. So we're trying to do a lot of work to bring them together, which actually brings me to this. I'm running actually a conference at NYU about LARP next month, which is going to be the first academic conference in the United States for LARP. And we're bringing people. Yes, thank you. This is my graduate thesis project, actually, and we're bringing people from around the world, including from Russia and Belarus and the Nordic countries, to come and speak about what they do. So if you have more interest in this, come and talk to us. And if you go on my blog, actually, I've got a list of resources for LARP a while back that I put together for people who are asking. So. So far, me is a person. There aren't that many I know that branch back and forth. That yes, there are a few, and it would be, I think we should actually speak more about it. Is really kind of why I'm here today and why I, positioned this talk, is to say that like there really is a lot that we can learn and we can share together. So I would love if more people were actually, talking about that. So yeah. Yeah.
You are running a LARP.
That's right. Tomorrow night at Night
Tell
Games.
us about that, and there's a sign-up sheet.
Totally. Let's do that. So tomorrow night at Night Games, I'm actually going to be running a small LARP. It's an introductory game, so if you've never LARPed before, don't worry, it's not that scary. We'll even do some exercises to kind of get you comfortable with LARP. It's called The Last 10 Minutes, and it's basically about what happens when you're invited to a party at the end of the world, the last 10 minutes of the world. So, yeah, no pressure or anything, right? Let's just jump right in. So that's it. And there's going to be a sign-up sheet right here. It's going to be during Night Games tomorrow night. It's about 25 people slot, so it's going to be at 7 o'clock.
We'll have that sheet here and now, and then after this session, it'll be at the front desk if you want to sign up after this session.
Cool. Is there time for any more questions, or are we out? One more, anybody? Sure. So that's actually one of the biggest things that's being talked about right now. There's a company out in California called Legend, which is trying to incorporate technology into costuming so that it can be, your hit points can be calculated by your costume when you get hit. My company is actually working on, Phoenix Outlaw Productions is my company. We're working on some mobile technology for people to log in their character sheets and use like geocaching and stuff like that. It's a few years out for us because we're developing out of my living room, but it's there are companies that are looking at that and doing a lot of research into how technology can augment play. I'm particularly interested in finding out how we can actually introduce audienceship into LARP without it being invasive, using cameras and technology sort of Big Brother style, which is sort of my next plot, but we'll see. That takes more money than I can get it from, Kinko's or Staples and stuff. So we'll see if I can get that done. Yep. Arduino boards that look like Battlestar, They did, Dead Reckoning. They were incredible people. So there's a lot of good stuff that you can learn from them just for technology's sake. So, cool. Thank you very much.